It's my honor to introduce Professor Robert Keiter, the Wallace Stegner Professor of Law and University Distinguished Professor and founding director of the Wallace Stegner Center for Land Resources and Environment at the University of Utah. Widely recognized as one of the nation's leading public land and national park scholars, Bob has authored many influential works, including his most recent book, Conserving Nature in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, Controversy and Change in an Iconic Ecosystem. So very timely that we have Bob giving this keynote under the theme of change for this panel. I've been personally fortunate to know Bob since he served on the Ruckelshaus Institute board many years ago. Bob was a professor at the University of Wyoming Law School before he moved to Utah. He is an expert on Wyoming constitutional law, along with public lands and national parks. But I can remember a conversation I had with Bob at the Ruckelshaus Institute meeting about where should I go to law school. And the best advice he gave me is somewhere where you can keep your debt down so you can do the type of law that you're passionate about doing. And Bob, you changed the course of my life through that conversation, and I'm so grateful for that today. So today we have Bob bringing his depth of knowledge and expertise to help us understand the changes shaping the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem and what they mean for the future of this iconic landscape. So please join me in giving Bob a warm welcome. Can you take this?
Great. No. Well, thank you, Temple, and thank you for putting on this conference, which I think we're all benefiting from the interchange of knowledge and experience. Let me also thank your colleagues at the Haub Center for all of the work that they put into the conference. I'm pleased to once again be back on Wyoming soil, sort of my second home, even though I've been living in Utah a number of years now. And I look forward to sharing some insight and thought with you. I'm sort of a poor substitute for the superintendent of Grand Teton National Park, Chip Jenkins. All I can say is that when I was about 12 years old, all I wanted to do was to be a superintendent of a national park. Somehow my life's path took a little bit different direction here. So let me, what I'd like to do is share my research and observations on wildlife management in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem that's now spanned more than 40 years and 4 related books. And just to give you a sense of perspective, I think, on what has transpired. So my most recent book that Temple held up seeks to explain how the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem idea and related ecological conservation concepts have come to be and how they have evolved here in this remarkable place, along with the wildlife controversies and the other really significant changes. We've heard a lot about this already that have been driven by these ideas. First, a little bit of background about the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem and the science, the entities, the laws, and the other forces behind our evolving wildlife management efforts. This slide depicts the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. You've seen similar versions before at 23 million acres. The GYE is a jurisdictionally complex and legally fragmented landscape. Each entity, that includes the 4 federal land management agencies, the 3 states, nearby tribes, 20 counties, diverse communities, and many private landowners, has each its own priorities and policies when it comes to wildlife management. I should note that the GYE, the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, is not a formal legal entity. Congress has not blessed it in any way. And Also note that roughly about 12 million acres of federal land within the GYE enjoy some level of conservation-related protection. That's a pretty significant amount of land, about half or more of the area. As for the human dimension, many people believe, I think appropriately, that what we're seeing in the GYE is the advent of a, quote, new West, that it also occurs elsewhere, places. This idea that we're seeing a new West places a premium on protecting the region's natural heritage and amenities, including its wildlife, while at the same time, if you will, sort of generating significant population growth, shifting economic priorities, private land development pressures, and other political changes. On the science front, as the discipline of conservation biology has matured, it's played a critical role in evolving Greater Yellowstone ecosystem wildlife conservation efforts. As the responsible federal and state agencies, add tribal to that too, have absorbed and sought to apply some of the new scientific insights, including the initial movement toward ecosystem management, and more recently, landscape scale conservation and migratory corridor protection initiatives. The bottom slide, incidentally, depicts efforts at the large landscape scale to basically connect the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem with the crown of the continent ecosystem that we heard about earlier this morning. The GYE is awash in legal and institutional complexity that's reflected in the governing laws, the different entities and institutions that are at play in the region. During the 1960s and 1970s, we saw Congress adopt an array of new federal laws that set the stage for major changes in federal public land policy and management, including wildlife policy. That also generated considerable litigation both in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem and elsewhere. Note that again, let me make this point, that the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem itself has not been blessed by Congress, and an important institution that has been at work in the ecosystem since the 1960s is the Greater Yellowstone Coordinating Committee, initially a group of the principal, National Park and U.S. Forest Service managers that has over the years grown to include additional federal agencies as well as now state representatives. Also worth noting and important, I think, that state law has from the outset played an important role when you think about wildlife management outside of the national parks and when you think about private land use in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Turning to wildlife conservation, as has been discussed frequently, the GYE concept and the notion of ecosystem management is directly relevant here, primarily because wildlife, the wild animals, simply are not constrained by the jurisdictional boundaries that we've imposed on the landscape, but these boundaries actually reflect some major differences in federal, state, tribal law and policy that have generated over the decades and continue to generate a source of controversy in the GYE. But conservation science tells us that notwithstanding these different laws, it's important that we proceed to seek to manage as best we can on a coordinated basis. Turning to the national parks, at the core of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem are two world-famous national parks. They're governed under the National Park Service Organic Act that gives full legal protection to wildlife within park boundaries and prohibits hunting unless Congress has authorized it, which indeed, as many of you know, it has within Grand Teton National Park. The 1963 Leopold Report is important broadly in national park history in the United States, but in particular in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. It directed the National Park Service to basically, moving forward, let nature take its course. Less management, more let the ecosystem function naturally. This has allowed wildlife to roam freely. This is often referred to as natural process or natural regulation management, but it's created problems also. Again, that's because when the animals cross the park boundary line and encounter different management priorities, the Park Service has no longer any jurisdiction or authority over them. They are under a different management regime. Taking a look at specific wildlife issues within the GYE. In 1975, as the Greater Yellowstone grizzly bear numbers were dwindling to something in the neighborhood of 136 bears, the grizzly bear soon received protection under the Endangered Species Act in 1975. In 1983, roughly 8 years later, the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee brought together federal land managers and state wildlife managers in what has become, I believe, a sort of flagship example of coordinated interagency management within the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. As a result, the grizzly bear numbers have grown to about 1,000 bears. Bear habitat has expanded considerably to roughly an additional 50% of where it was as the bears have expanded outward. What we're seeing and what we saw, have seen as a result of that, have been efforts to delist the Yellowstone grizzly bear population. Those efforts thus far have been thwarted by the courts in a couple of different major lawsuits, leaving the bears at this point in time under the jurisdiction of the federal government, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It remains to be seen how long that will continue to be the case, as the state of Wyoming is in court at the moment seeking delisting on the part of the federal government. Also, efforts are afoot in Congress. Meantime, interestingly, at the conclusion of the Biden administration, we had a status review of the Yellowstone grizzly bear population with a new proposal coming out of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that would expand dramatically to a landscape, one might even say beyond landscape scale, conservation effort for the grizzly bear and to treat the 6 different grizzly bear populations found in the northern Rockies in the United States as one distinct multi-state population segment. This proposal, I think, gives a sense of how the notion of ecosystem management, think the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, has grown and expanded. Efforts to connect the 2 grizzly bear populations up in the Glacier country with the Yellowstone country, and now this proposal, not sure it's going to go very far, but it gives us a sense, I think, of the expansion of conservation efforts in this region. As far as wolf conservation goes, here again, the Endangered Species Act ends up playing a major role in restoring wolves that were reintroduced in 1995 under the Section 10J provision, the experimental population provision of the Endangered Species Act that provided the Fish and Wildlife Service with flexible management tools that enabled the wolf numbers to grow quickly up to 177 animals by 2001 and prompted delisting efforts quickly. This is within, 15 years or less of the reintroduction, or less than 10 years, excuse me, of the reintroduction. The court said no, that the proposals were premature at that point in time, but Congress intervened in 2011 and basically effectively transferred management responsibility for the wolves to the states. We now have a wolf population in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, somewhere in excess of 500 wolves under state management. That's become controversial as Montana and Idaho have tightened or maybe I should say loosened their wolf hunting and trapping laws to the point where, among other things, we've seen a large number of Yellowstone wolves ending up being killed during a hunting season as they venture beyond the park boundaries. All of which I think suggests that we're not there yet as far as wolf conservation goes in establishing an effective, coordinated federal state management effort. There's more work to be done. Bison were an early wildlife recovery success in Yellowstone Park going back to the early 20th century. But since then, Yellowstone's free-ranging bison have become entangled in an intense, decades-long controversy involving the Park Service and the state of Montana, along with the Animal, Plant, and Health Service under the Department of Agriculture and the federal government, all of which is rooted in the yet unsubstantiated fear that the bison might transmit the brucellosis bacteria to nearby cattle when the bison migrate out of the park. Following, much transpired. I put some of it on the slide. Much has transpired, not time to go into it, but following the intentional killing over a couple of decades now of more than 10,000 bison, we have a National Park Service Yellowstone Park bison management plan adopted in 2024 over objections from the state of Montana, I should add, but that have introduced a bison conservation transfer program that would move increasingly larger numbers of bison, disease-free bison, from the park as they migrate out onto nearby Native American reservations, rekindling spiritual and cultural ties between the tribes and the bison, and providing a potential solution to the major part of the bison management problem. Notice the degree of coordination that's been involved in putting this bison transfer program into place, involving the Park Service, tribal governments, the state of Montana to some degree, although it's in court seeking to block this particular plan, and a number of other agencies and entities. It remains to be seen if we're going to achieve suitable to all parties coordinated effort to ensure bison conservation in the long term. In Wyoming, the National Elk Refuge and the state have long provided winter feed grounds where elk are artificially fed, causing them to congregate in large numbers and creating prime conditions for transmission of brucellosis and now the always fatal chronic wasting disease. The overarching management question yet to be answered is whether the state might, and the National Elk Refuge, let me add that, might decide to cease artificial feeding on the refuge and the 22 state feed grounds. A move that would be a monumental change in elk management in Wyoming. There obviously are a number of constituencies concerned about this. But the question when we're talking about ecological management is whether this would be an appropriate move or whether we have altered the landscape so much that it simply is not feasible to make this move. You can sense the underlying political considerations that go into whether or not to move forward with such a move. Finally, in terms of wildlife in the GYE, thanks to new scientific information and technology, and we've heard a bit about that already, biologists now better understand the annual migratory patterns for elk, deer, pronghorn, and other ungulates, as well as the multiple boundaries that they cross, which has effectively expanded the size of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem and generated, interestingly, considerable political support to protect migration corridors. But while habitat on the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem's national forests is relatively secure for migratory purposes, that's not always true when it comes to the private lands or the BLM oil field outside of Pinedale that these animals frequently must navigate. Wyoming has taken the lead in pursuing migration corridor protection initiative, but has hesitated to move aggressively yet on this. Nonetheless, we do have in place, at least to some degree, the path of the pronghorn migration corridors reflected on one of the maps here. That has been a collaborative effort between federal, state, Forest Service, Park Service, conservation groups, private landowners, to put and the BLM to put that path in place. At least, in fact, the state of Wyoming has thus far hesitated to officially designate it under its migration corridor policies. But that remains pending at this juncture. But at any rate, it provides a potential model of coordinated management for protection of wildlife corridors that could be used more broadly, both within the ecosystem and beyond the ecosystem. I've talked about the wildlife mostly in terms of population numbers. Obviously, habitat is critical to the long-term welfare of wildlife. And first question is, what's the status of that habitat on the multiple use public lands? And here we're talking about the national forest and BLM lands that provide critical habitat and play a central role also in regional wildlife management efforts. As I noted before, note that on the map in the middle, the dark green, that the forest lands that surround the two GYE national parks include a substantial amount of wilderness acreage adjacent to the parks that create a large protected core area where industrial activities are not allowed. But as you move on forest and BLM lands outside of this protected core, then the multiple use mandate kicks in and opens the door for industrial type activities, including timber cutting, mining, and the like. And here we've got some history that gives us a sense of what has transpired over time. And give me just a second just to make sure I get my facts straight on this. So as far as, and this is an interesting dimension, I think, of the evolution of ecological management in the GYE. And on the national forest, timber harvesting down dramatically since the early 1990s, including numerous mill closures across the ecosystem. Oil and gas activity hot during the early 1980s and subsequently, but by and large confined to the Pinedale anticline area, which is on the southern edge of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And we've seen the BLM adopt some significant wildlife stipulations there. New mines have been proposed during the last 30, 40 years in the GYE and generally stopped through one form or another, including congressional intervention that ended up with passage of the Yellowstone Gateway Protection Act, withdrawing lands north of Yellowstone Park from future mining. Livestock grazing reduced significantly via buyouts, no sheep allotments within the GYE over concern about grizzly bear mortalities. And we've seen significant money through the federal government, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and other entities going to ranchers to support harmonization of livestock grazing and wildlife. Interestingly, although we have this protected core wilderness area in the national forest, since 1984, what's that, 40 years ago, we have seen absolutely no new wilderness designated within the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. That, of course, is a political act where Congress is responsible for making the final decision. But that said, we do have a couple of noteworthy developments. One is the passage of the Wyoming Range Legacy Act that many of you are familiar with, that basically eliminated the oil and gas development prospect west of the Pinedale anticline area in the Wyoming Range. And secondly, the adoption by the Forest Service in 2001 of the roadless rule, which of course is at issue currently, whether that will continue or not. Add to this in terms of multiple use management, recreational activity on forest and BLM lands. And by many accounts, we're verging up against industrial scale recreation on these lands. Think of the growing three major ski areas in the GYE, along with the number of people recreating on the landscape and coming into conflict with wildlife. It remains to be seen precisely where the Trump administration is headed, but certainly the policies set forth in Project 2025 suggest more industrial activity, which will present some problems for wildlife. Moving quickly, wildlife habitat on private lands, critically important, even more important. 30 years ago, the focus of conservation groups in the region was on the public lands and addressing the industrial activities occurring there. Now, the focus has turned to the roughly 6 million acres of privately owned lands, much of which is ranch land located at lower elevations near water sources, which make this important for wildlife habitat and migratory pathways. But owing to explosive population growth occurring across much of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, there's a lot of subdivision activity occurring that has put wildlife habitat in jeopardy on these lands. The obvious, or one obvious way, I should say, to address this is through land use planning and regulation. But by and large, those laws, first of all, are state laws. They're relatively weak within the region, and they're not necessarily politically popular, especially given the commitment to private property rights that is so prevalent across the Intermountain West. The alternative, conservation easements. We've heard a fair amount about that. About 1.3 million acres, best I can tell, is under conservation easement protection within the GYE, and that is important, but it's costly. These are private transactions, which means there's no public involvement or input into the conservation easement transactions, and they're not enforceable except by the easement holder. So they're very helpful, but they're not an absolute panacea in terms of addressing this. And of course, property values continue to go up, more money needed. Private philanthropy becomes more and more important, along with potential government funding to support this. We do have some advances with the presence now of habitat leases as an alternative that could be proved particularly helpful here. Basically, we're in the frontier, I think, on private land conservation in the GYE as in terms of particularly wildlife habitat protection. And again, unlike on the federal public lands, where you had a lot of strong federal laws, think the Endangered Species Act, for example, at play, you have much weaker state laws at play. Finally, we do have, I think, a very helpful example of landscape scale conservation that is taking form in the High Divide region. That's an innovative effort to involving both public and private lands, trying to enable wildlife to move from the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem area into the crown of the continent, vice versa, to help connect grizzly bear populations there. And it's also, the initiative is committed to retaining the region's rural setting and ranching heritage with the cooperation of the conservation groups, landowners, the various agencies, both federal and state, and private philanthropic donations. It, I think, potentially represents another promising model for moving forward with this notion of landscape scale conservation in the GYE. So what should be evident by now with this brief review of GYE wildlife conservation efforts is that there are an array of diverse entities and forces that have brought us to this point. The slide tries to depict them and in brief highlight some of the strategies that have been pursued. The non-governmental organization community, the conservation community through advocacy, litigation, land trusts, use of private philanthropy has been a key player in both the growth of ecosystem management and the movement toward landscape scale conservation. I've talked about science before, its role. Clearly, facts are important in understanding how to move forward with conservation. Federal land management agencies have evolved dramatically since the 1960s, 70s, 80s, with different priorities and policies in place. Tremendous change within the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem communities. Federal law continues to play a role, both in terms of how the agencies behave and in terms of a tool when the conservation community perceives that they haven't behaved appropriately. State law, I think, is becoming a much more important player in conservation efforts in the area, as I noted, primarily because It's what governs private land use management and decisions, as well as it governs wildlife management outside of the parks and outside of an endangered species designation. We think of local politics being important, but national politics have proved to be important in the GYE2. I note some of the legislation, including presidential action when it came to the New World Mine controversy in the 1990s, that has been important here. And of course, state politics are important. And this tension between federal and state government is persistent and has been with us for some time, and I don't think will be going away. Nonetheless, we do see a number of instances of very helpful cooperative activity on the part of the federal and state agencies for wildlife and otherwise within the GYE. This slide tries to sort of capture principal developments. Let me see if I can highlight them quickly. It seems to me over the last 50, 60 years, which almost goes back to when does go back beyond when I got involved, that the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem concept now widely embraced here. Nature conservation has become something of a de facto priority within the GYE. Jurisdictional complexity continues. We're not going to get rid of it, but we are seeing interagency coordination working in many instances and evolving in others. Importantly, one lesson I take away from this is that we haven't been able to come up with a sort of central vision for the entire GYE. And as a result, as I hope was clear from my presentation, we're seeing these issues resolved issue by issue rather than through some sort of comprehensive plan. National parks boundary line continues to be relevant. Their wildlife populations in generally pretty good shape, but obviously issues remaining regarding the fate of the grizzly bear over the long haul under the Endangered Species Act, chronic wasting disease, and the elk populations in the area. The bison issue remains unresolved, at least in full. Habitat and wildlife corridor concerns remain, particularly on private lands. The industrial activities within the national forests at this point in time, relatively constrained here, but new recreation pressures to be aware of and that will have to be dealt with. No new wilderness, I mentioned that earlier. Private land conservation challenges remain and are growing. And I think we've seen the emergence of what I refer to as in the book as culture-related conservation activity. One, seeking to preserve the ranching heritage on the landscape. Two, the Native American communities and tribes coming into and getting directly involved in conservation, public land conservation and wildlife conservation initiatives throughout the area. And underlying this movement, I think an important dimension of it is the continued role that private philanthropy is playing in the area. Social justice concerns remain in terms of housing and affordability and those sorts of issues that we need to begin to take into account moving forward. Ecosystem management, landscape conservation, works in progress, but what I hope I've conveyed is that ecosystem management seems to be evolving into landscape conservation in the GYE. So in conclusion, let's contemplate John Muir's observation that when one tugs at a single thing in nature, he finds it attached to the rest of the world. That certainly seems appropriate for understanding the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem and all of the various connections within it. And then as the Wallace Stegner professor at the University of Utah, I can't help but share with you his words when we think about the future and the legacy that we're prepared to leave to our forebears or forthcoming generations, excuse me. When one cannot be pessimistic about the West, this is a native home of hope. When it fully learns that cooperation, not rugged individualism, is the quality that most characterizes and preserves it, then it will have achieved itself and outlived its origins. Let's hope that that's what the future holds for the GYE. Thank you.